When people say marriage is built on trust, they never talk about the quiet spaces between that trust, the unspoken corners, the closed doors, the secrets you never think to question. For 20 years, I thought my husband, Daniel, and I had the kind of love that didn't need words. He was gentle, thoughtful, and protective, maybe a little too protective. Especially when it came to the farm. He'd inherited it from his late uncle years before we met. It sat about 30 miles outside our town in rural Pennsylvania, a stretch of land surrounded by heavy woods, old fences, and silence. I always imagined it as something haunted, the way he talked about it, a place that shouldn't be disturbed. He never took me there. He never let me go there. And when I asked why, his answer was always the same. Nothing there for you, Lily. Just old ghosts and bad memories. I used to think that was poetic, that maybe something painful had happened there when he was a boy. But after he died, I realized it wasn't just pain he was hiding. It was something else entirely. Daniel passed away in his sleep, peacefully, the doctors said. Heart failure. He was only 53. There were no warning signs, no lingering illness, no long goodbyes. One night, we watched the rain together, and the next morning, he was gone, his hand cold against mine, his face oddly calm, as if he'd known it was coming. The funeral was quiet. Just me, a few friends, and his distant cousin Mark, a man who looked uncomfortable in a suit, shifting through the ceremony as if he was late for something more important. After the burial, Mark approached me with a brief nod. "You'll need to check the property, Lily," he said, his tone firm. "What property?" "The farm. He left it to you in the will." My breath caught. "The farm?" He nodded. "Everything there is yours now. The lawyer will send the keys." And that's how it began, the slow unraveling of a secret that had been buried longer than I'd been married. The first few weeks after Daniel's death were quiet, painfully quiet. The house felt too big, the walls too full of echoes. His favorite mug sat on the counter, still stained with coffee from the day before he died. His jacket hung by the door, and his shoes rested neatly under the bench. I couldn't move them. It felt wrong, like erasing him. Then, one afternoon, a brown envelope arrived. Inside was a set of old iron keys and a handwritten note. "Lily, you'll find the answers you need where I always told you not to go. Please forgive me. Daniel." I read that note over and over until the paper nearly tore in my hands. It wasn't like him to be cryptic. Daniel was simple, straightforward, the kind of man who fixed problems, not created them. But this felt like a confession written in riddles. The next morning, I packed a small bag, locked the house, and drove out to the countryside. The road to the farm was narrow and uneven, lined with tall oak trees that arched over the gravel like watchful sentinels. The air grew colder as I drove deeper into the woods, and the sunlight dimmed, even though it was only noon. When I finally saw the farmhouse, I stopped the car and just stared. It was old, painfully old, but not abandoned. The white paint was peeling, the roof sagged slightly, yet there was a strange, deliberate upkeep to it. The grass was cut. The porch had been swept recently, and the mailbox by the gate bore a small brass plate that read D. Whitmore. He'd been here recently. He'd been maintaining it. My pulse quickened as I unlocked the gate and drove in. The silence of the place pressed against me. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. As I stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned beneath my feet, and for a moment, I hesitated. It felt like trespassing even though it was mine now. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something metallic. The furniture was covered with sheets, but the floors were swept, and the air was too fresh to be abandoned for long. Someone had been here, recently enough to keep it alive. I wandered from room to room, a kitchen with old cast-iron pans hanging by the stove, a sitting room with faded wallpaper, a small study lined with shelves full of journals and ledgers. Everything was still. Too still. And then I saw the door. At the end of the hallway, half hidden behind a coat rack, was a door made of heavy oak, locked with a padlock. It looked newer than the rest of the house. My stomach tightened as I reached into my bag and tried one of the keys from Daniel's envelope. It clicked open. The smell hit me first, damp, earthy, and strangely sweet, like old hay mixed with something decaying. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I pushed the door open. It led down to a basement. The wooden steps creaked under my weight. I fumbled for a light switch and found one on the wall. The bulb flickered weakly before casting a pale yellow glow across the room. What I saw made my breath hitch. The basement was divided into two sections. One looked like an ordinary storage area with tools, boxes, and canned goods. But the other half was different. There was a large metal table covered with tarps, several sealed crates, and a small cot pushed into the corner, as if someone had been sleeping down there. A stack of photographs sat neatly on the table, next to a ledger and a worn leather glove. I picked up the top photo. It showed a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, standing in front of this very farmhouse. He looked scared, his eyes hollow. In the background, Daniel stood behind him, younger, but unmistakably him, his arm resting stiffly on the boy's shoulder. The next photo showed the same boy, older now, sitting at a table inside what looked like this basement. His face was bruised. And the third photo made my knees buckle. It was a photo of me, taken years ago, in our garden, from a distance. My hand shook as I dropped the stack of photos onto the table. None of this made sense. Why would Daniel have pictures of some random boy and me hidden here? Why would he keep this a secret? I picked up the ledger. The first few pages were filled with numbers, crop tallies, and dates normal enough for a farm record. But further in, the handwriting changed. It became messy, frantic. It's getting worse. They're asking questions. If they find out, we'll lose everything. The boy can't know the truth. I swallowed hard. The entries spanned nearly 20 years. And the last one, dated just a few days before Daniel's death, made my blood run cold. If she ever finds this place, tell her the truth. I'm sorry. I sank into the chair beside the table, the paper trembling in my hands. What truth? Who was the boy? And why did my husband think I'd never forgive him? I sat there for hours, sifting through photos, papers, and fragments of a life I didn't recognize. Then, as the light outside began to fade, I heard it, a faint sound coming from outside the basement window. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Approaching the house. I froze. The sound grew louder, the crunch of gravel, then the squeak of the porch step. Someone was here. I turned off the light, my heart pounding in my chest, and crept toward the stairs. From the shadows, I heard the front door creak open. Then a man's voice, low and familiar, called out softly, "Mrs. Whitmore, you shouldn't have come here." The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty farmhouse. I held my breath, frozen halfway up the basement stairs. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but something, curiosity, maybe fear, kept me still. The voice came again, closer this time. "Mrs. Whitmore," the man said softly, "I told Daniel you should never come here." My heart pounded. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. Just the faint creak of a floorboard. I slowly climbed the last few steps, pushing the basement door open just enough to peek into the hallway. A tall man stood near the front door, silhouetted by the fading daylight. He wore a brown jacket, his face shadowed by the brim of his cap. When he saw me, he didn't move, he just stared. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "My name is Mark. I'm Daniel's cousin." My breath caught. "You were at the funeral." He nodded once. "I told you to come here, but not like this. Not alone." "What's going on?" I demanded. Why did Daniel keep this place a secret from me? What's in that basement? Mark stepped forward, and for the first time, I saw the lines of worry etched deep across his face. "You found the photographs, didn't you?" "Yes," I whispered. "The boy, the ledger, and me. Why would my husband have those?" Mark looked away. "Because he was trying to protect you." We sat at the kitchen table, the air heavy with silence. The only sound was the faint hum of crickets outside. Mark stared down at his hands, turning his wedding ring slowly around his finger. "Daniel wasn't supposed to take over this farm," he began quietly. "It was his uncle's. You know that much. But what you don't know is what his uncle was doing here." He hesitated, then looked up. His uncle was part of a government research program back in the 80s. They were experimenting with agricultural genetics, crops, livestock, and later, humans. My stomach twisted. Humans? Mark nodded grimly. They said it was to study inherited traits, how DNA could be manipulated to eliminate disease. But it went too far. They started testing on children from orphanages, paying off caretakers to keep quiet. I shook my head, disbelief clouding my thoughts. No. That can't be real. Daniel would never, he didn't know at first, Mark interrupted. When their uncle died, Daniel inherited the farm and everything on it, including the research records. He wanted to shut it down, burn it all. But there was one problem. He paused. There was still one of them left. I stared at him, confused. One of who? Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. One of the children. My mind reeled. The boy in the photographs. The bruises. The fear in his eyes. Daniel found him here? I asked. Yes. He was about 9 then. Barely spoke. Didn't even have a real name, just a number. Mark rubbed his temples, his voice trembling slightly. Daniel couldn't turn him over to the authorities. The whole thing would have come out, and he was terrified of what they'd do to the boy. So he hid him. Kept him here. Tried to raise him quietly, away from everything. I stared at the wooden floor, my heart hammering. You mean, my husband was hiding a child? Here. Mark nodded. He told me it was temporary. That he'd find a way to help him start a new life. But something changed. The boy started showing signs. What kind of signs? I whispered. Mark hesitated, then said, he wasn't like other children. He'd heal from injuries overnight. He could memorize entire books after reading them once. But sometimes, he'd have violent fits, like something inside him was fighting to get out. I shivered, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. Where is he now? That's the thing, Mark said, meeting my eyes. Daniel said the boy disappeared one night. Ran off into the woods. He searched for weeks, but never found him. After that, he locked the farm, sealed the basement, and swore never to go back. I felt the room tilt. And you believe that? Mark's face darkened. I used to. But Daniel started coming back here again about 6 months ago. Said he needed to make sure everything was still, contained. Contained? He nodded. Whatever was created here, it wasn't entirely gone. A sudden noise shattered the silence, the sharp creak of a floorboard upstairs. Mark and I froze. He rose quickly, motioning for me to stay put. Lock the door behind me, he whispered, pulling a small flashlight from his jacket. I watched him disappear up the staircase, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. Every sound felt amplified, his footsteps, the wind rattling the windows, the faint groan of the old house settling. Then came the sound of something else. A thud. Then another. Followed by silence. Mark! I called out. No response. The light flickered briefly from upstairs, then went out completely. I stood, heart racing, clutching one of the heavy iron keys like a weapon. Slowly, I made my way to the base of the stairs. Mark! Still nothing. Then, from the shadows above, a voice low, strained, but not his. He told you not to come here. I stumbled back. As a figure stepped into view. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was a young man, maybe in his late 20s, tall and lean, dressed in old, torn clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in years. His hair was long and tangled, his face pale and almost familiar in a haunting way. But it was his eyes that froze me in place, cold, intelligent, and oddly familiar. You shouldn't be here, he said again, his voice low and measured. Who are you? I whispered. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, he said, I think you already know. My breath caught. The boy. He nodded once. Daniel's wife. My knees weakened. What happened to Mark? He's fine, the young man said. I told him to stay quiet. He didn't listen. Please, I said, taking a cautious step forward. If Daniel helped you, I just want to understand. I'm not here to hurt you. He studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "He didn't help me. He tried to destroy me." The man walked slowly down the stairs, each step deliberate, as if testing my reaction. When he reached the bottom, I could see him clearly under the dim light, his features sharp, almost too perfect, his expression unreadable. "Daniel was my father," he said finally. My stomach dropped. "That's not possible." "I assure you it is." His tone was calm, almost detached. "Not in the way you think, though. He didn't conceive me, he created me. I'm the reason this farm existed. The reason he could never tell you." I took a step back, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Created you?" He nodded. "I was an experiment. The last one. The only one who survived. He thought he could save me, fix what they did, but it was too late." His eyes darkened, and I saw something flicker in them, a faint, unnatural glow. "I'm not supposed to exist," he whispered. "But I do." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear rolled down my cheek. "What do you want from me?" He looked at me for a long moment before replying. "To finish what he started." He promised to end it, but he couldn't. "You will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rusted key. "There's another door. In the barn. What's locked inside belongs to me. Unlock it, and you'll understand everything." Before I could speak, he turned and disappeared into the darkness outside, leaving the front door open and swinging in the wind. I stood there, shaking, clutching the key he'd left behind. The silence of the farmhouse felt heavier than ever, pressing against my chest. Daniel had always said the farm was full of ghosts. He just never told me one of them was still alive. The night air outside the farmhouse was colder than I expected, sharp, damp, and alive with sounds I couldn't place. The wind hissed through the trees, and every creak of the old wood made me jump. I gripped the small rusted key the young man had given me, turning it over in my hand as if it might whisper an answer. "There's another door. In the barn," he'd said. "What's locked inside belongs to me." But who was he, really? Daniel's son? His experiment? His sin? The line between truth and madness was beginning to blur, and I wasn't sure which side I stood on anymore. I looked back at the farmhouse, its windows dark now, except for the faint glow of a lamp still burning in the kitchen. Mark hadn't returned. My heart ached with worry, but fear pushed me onward. Whatever Daniel had been hiding all these years, it was in that barn. The barn stood about 100 yards from the house, its roof slanted and its wood faded to a dull grey. I'd seen it from the road when I first arrived, but now, in the dark, it looked different, larger somehow, older, like it was holding its breath. I approached slowly, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air smelled faintly of rust and earth, and something else, something chemical. The barn doors were secured with a heavy chain and a small iron lock. I held up the rusted key and slid it in. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. As I pulled the doors apart, the hinges groaned in protest. A cold draft rushed out, carrying the smell of old hay, oil, and decay. I switched on my flashlight. Inside, the barn was vast, rows of wooden beams rising into darkness, dust swirling through the beam of my light. But something was wrong. This wasn't just a barn. It was a lab. There were metal tables lined with glass jars, rusted instruments, and scattered papers. Old electrical equipment was stacked against the far wall, monitors, wiring, and strange cylindrical tanks filled with cloudy liquid. I stepped closer. The tanks were labeled with faded tags, Subject 3A, Subject 3B, Subject 4. Each tank was cracked, the glass fogged from age. I wiped my sleeve across one and gasped. Inside floated something, human-shaped. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The figure inside was small, a child, maybe 8 years old, pale and still, eyes closed. The body was preserved, suspended in the murky liquid like a ghost caught in time. There were more tanks, some empty, others shattered. I felt my stomach twist as I read the labels: failed integration, incomplete, deceased. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been farming. It had been creation. I moved deeper into the barn, my steps echoing. There was a workbench with scattered notebooks, photographs, and glass slides. Daniel's handwriting was all over them, his neat, careful script slowly unraveling into frantic scrawls. He's changing faster than expected. Cognitive response exceeds human capacity. Aggression spikes correlate with emotional stress. He calls me father now. God forgive me. I pressed a hand to my mouth, my chest tightening. Daniel had raised that boy. He'd tried to treat him like a son, but he'd also documented him like an experiment. The last page was dated 2 days before Daniel's death. He found me. He knows everything. If I can't stop him, Lily must never come here. She won't understand what has become. A sound came from behind me, soft, deliberate. I turned sharply, my light cutting through the dark. The young man stood in the doorway, his face half in shadow. I told you, he said quietly, what's in here belongs to me. I stepped back, trembling. You did this. You killed them. His eyes flashed. They were never alive to begin with. I'm the only one who survived. Daniel tried to protect you, I said, my voice shaking. He wanted to help. He stepped closer, his face twisting with something like pain. He lied to me. He said I was special, a miracle. But all I was a mistake. He ran his fingers along one of the tanks, his expression dark. He tried to destroy the others. Burned them alive in this barn. I watched him do it. I covered my mouth, horrified. No, Daniel wouldn't. He did, the young man said flatly. And when I ran, he came after me. He said he loved me, that I was his son. But every time he looked at me, I saw fear. He looked at me then, truly looked. Do you fear me too? I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that whatever he was still human, still someone Daniel loved. But the words wouldn't come. Because I did fear him. He smiled faintly, as if reading my thoughts. He told you I was gone, didn't he? I nodded. He stepped closer, the light glinting off his pale skin. He couldn't kill me. He tried, but my body heals itself. The more he hurt me, the stronger I became. Eventually, he stopped trying. I backed away until I hit the workbench behind me. What do you want from me? His expression softened. To finish what he started. He built a device, a way to shut down what he created. He couldn't bring himself to use it. But you can. He pointed to the far corner of the barn. There, beneath a top, sat a metal box connected to wires and an old generator. That, he said, will end it. I stared at the machine, confused. End what? He smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, almost alive. You want to die? I whispered. He nodded slowly. I was never meant to live. My mind isn't mine. My memories aren't real. Every time I close my eyes, I see faces that aren't mine. People screaming. Children crying. I feel their pain like it's inside me. His voice trembled. He thought I was a miracle. I'm not. I'm a monster wearing human skin. I took a small step toward him. You're not a monster. You're just broken. His eyes flicked up to mine, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. That's what he used to say. I swallowed hard. Then let me help you. He studied me for a long time, then nodded toward the machine. Turn it on. Please. Before I change my mind. My hands trembled as I crossed the barn. The generator looked ancient, rusted metal, cracked dials, wires running into a steel panel. Daniel's handwriting was scrawled across the side, fail-safe system. I found the main switch. What will it do? I asked. Erase me, he said simply. Every cell in my body is connected to a frequency. He built it to neutralize what he called the anomaly. I looked at him, so young, so lost, and felt a deep ache in my chest. Daniel loved you, I whispered. He wouldn't have wanted this. He smiled faintly. He already tried it once. That's why he's dead. My breath caught. What? He nodded. He came here, turned it on. But instead of killing me, it killed him. His heart couldn't take the energy surge. He saved me again, even when he shouldn't have. Tears filled my eyes. I don't understand why you want to die. He looked away. Because I can't keep fighting what's inside me. Every day I feel it, the rage, the pain, the memories that aren't mine. One day, I'll hurt someone. Maybe you. And I can't let that happen. For a long time, all I could hear was the wind whistling through the cracks of the barn. Finally, I whispered, if I do this, what happens to you? He smiled sadly. Then you'll finally know what Daniel died for. I stood there, torn between fear and compassion. The switch felt heavy in my hand. I thought of Daniel, his gentle smile, his secrets, his love. I thought of the boy in front of me, half man, half ghost of a tragedy born from human arrogance. And then, I pulled the lever. The generator roared to life, lights flickering violently. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. The young man staggered, clutching his head, a strangled cry escaping his throat. His eyes flared, glowing white-hot, and for a brief second, I saw something impossible. Hundreds of faces, flickering like reflections in shattered glass, screaming silently inside him. Then the light exploded, blinding, searing, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The generator was silent. The lights had burned out, and the only sound was the faint hiss of the wind through the cracks in the barn walls. The air smelled of smoke and ozone, sharp and bitter. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. My head throbbed, my ears rang, and my throat was raw from shouting. Then I saw him. The young man, Daniel's creation, lay crumpled near the far wall, motionless. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the floor where he'd fallen. The faint glow that had shimmered in his eyes was gone. I staggered toward him, my hands shaking. Hey. No response. I dropped to my knees beside him. His skin was cold, his pulse faint, but still there. He was alive. Barely. Why won't you die? I whispered. His eyes fluttered open, weak and unfocused. Because he didn't make me to die. Tears welled in my eyes. You asked me to help you. I tried. A faint smile touched his lips. You did. The energy, it burned the infection away. The part that wasn't me. He struggled to sit up, clutching his side. He built it to destroy the virus that made me what I am. But he didn't know, there was still human in me. What are you saying? I asked softly. He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, I saw something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not rage. Not confusion. Just peace. I remember, he whispered. I remember him holding me when I was a child. I remember him reading to me by the fire. I remember you, your voice in the garden, laughing. My breath caught. You, remember me? He nodded weakly. He used to show me pictures. Said you were the reason he wanted to make something good out of something evil. He wanted to create life, because he couldn't give you one. Those words hit harder than anything else that night. Because they were true. Daniel and I had tried for years to have a child. The treatments, the tests, the heartbreak, it had nearly broken us. He'd always said we should stop, that it wasn't meant to be. But I never realized what he'd done instead. He'd gone too far trying to give us a son. I covered my mouth, sobbing. Oh, Daniel, what did you do? The young man's voice broke through my grief. He gave me a chance. But I wasn't his son. Not really. Just a reflection of what he wanted most. He reached out, his hand trembling. I took it instinctively. His skin was warm again. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. For what I am. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. You're not a mistake. You're a miracle, just a painful one. He smiled faintly. That's what he said. Then his hand went limp in mine. For a long time, I just sat there, holding him, listening to the silence settle over the barn. The morning light had begun to seep through the cracks, soft and golden, cutting through the darkness like forgiveness. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Eventually, I stood, covered him gently with an old top, and turned to leave. That's when I saw it, a small wooden box sitting under the workbench. It must have been knocked loose during the explosion. Inside was a letter. My name was written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. My heart stuttered as I opened it. Lily, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally found you. I've kept more from you than you deserve, and I've hated myself for it every day. The boy you may have met, his name is Eli. I gave him that name. I thought if I gave him something human, he might become human. But what I didn't realize was that humanity isn't something you can create in a lab. It's something you nurture, love, and forgive. I couldn't forgive myself for what happened here. My uncle's work destroyed lives, and in trying to fix it, I became part of it. Eli wasn't a mistake, Lily. He was my redemption and my punishment. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I saw the pain in your eyes every time you looked at a child, and I couldn't add to it. So I buried the truth here, hoping it would die with me. Please, if you find him, forgive him. And if you can, forgive me too. Love always, Daniel. By the time I finished reading, the sunlight had filled the barn. Dust floated like tiny ghosts through the air. I stood in the doorway, the letter pressed to my chest, and looked out across the field. The farm that had once felt haunted now seemed peaceful, almost sacred. The secrets it had held were no longer screaming. They were finally still. That afternoon, I called the sheriff. I told him the truth, at least, the parts one could bear to share. They came, sealed the property, took photographs, collected evidence. The agents whispered among themselves, their faces pale when they saw the tanks and Daniel's notes. They called it a bioethical crime scene. I called it the graveyard of good intentions. They never found Eli's body. When they returned the next morning, the top I'd covered him with was there, but the ground beneath it was bare. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just emptiness. Some of the officers believed animals had dragged him off. Others thought I'd imagined him. But I knew the truth. Eli wasn't gone. Not really. He was free. Months passed. I sold the farm to the state, under the condition that it would never be used for agriculture again. They turned it into a memorial site for victims of unethical research. I visited once, a year later. The house was gone, but the barn still stood, rebuilt as a quiet museum of sorts, filled with plaques and photographs of those whose lives had been lost to human greed. I walked to the far end, where a small plaque bore Daniel's name. Daniel Whitmore, devoted husband, scientist, and redeemer. Below his name, in smaller letters, someone had added, "Sometimes love creates what logic cannot forgive." I don't know who wrote it. Maybe one of the officials. Maybe someone who'd read his journals. But standing there, I felt like it was meant for me. That night, I returned to our home in town, the house that still smelled faintly of him. The garden he'd loved was in full bloom. I sat on the bench where we used to drink coffee together and let the quiet settle around me. And then, as the wind rustled through the trees, I heard it, a voice. Faint. Familiar. "Thank you." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The sound came from the edge of the garden near the shadows of the old oak tree. For a moment, I thought I saw him, Eli, standing there, dressed in simple clothes, his face calm, his eyes gentle. He smiled, nodded once, and then turned away, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't chase him. I didn't scream. I just whispered, "You're welcome." Since that night, I've found peace. I still dream of Daniel sometimes, his laughter, his soft voice calling me Lily Girl. I dream of Eli, too, not as a creature, not as an experiment, but as a child sitting by a fire, listening to his father read stories. And maybe that's how I choose to remember it all. Not as horror, not as science gone wrong, but as love trying to heal what it broke. Daniel kept a secret to protect me. But in the end, that secret saved me too. Because sometimes, the things we're most afraid to face are the only ones that can set us free.